Good evening, everyone. I'm Pooja Khanna, SAS Woman of Dehradun. I'm happy to welcome you all to an amazing session of Tête, an initiative of Prabha Khaitan Foundation on the YouTube page of Kahali. Based in Kolkata, Prabha Khaitan Foundation is dedicated towards socio-cultural welfare and humanitarian causes for the past 4 decades. The organization has been dedicatedly working towards promotion of literature, heritage, and culture for over 40 cities in India and abroad with a network of committed volunteers and associates. The session of Tête, organized by Prabha Khaitan Foundation, is a freewheeling conversation where eminent personalities from varied walks of life come on board and speak on a particular subject. Our session today is with Mr. Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit is a commerce graduate from University of Madras. After pursuing a career in the corporate world, he turned his focus towards academia. He holds a master's degree in international relations from the School of Political and Social Inquiry at Monash University, Melbourne, and he has done his PhD. He served as a research assistant on several projects under the aegis of the Center for Muslim Minorities and Islam Policy Studies at Monash University. He is the program coordinator at the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. He's currently working a visiting research scholar at Sandia National Laboratory, New Mexico, and Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. Abhijit's research area focuses on defense planning, economics, technology, procurement, and nuclear dynamics. His interest areas in research also include military transformation, governance, and historical patterns of conflict in democracies. In conversation with her, we have Miss Advaita Kala. Advaita is a well-known Indian author, screenplay writer, and columnist. She has written screenplays for films such as the romantic drama Anjana Anjani and the thriller Kahani. Apart from writing for films, Miss Kala has also written 2 novels, Almost Single and Almost Done. During COVID-19 outbreak in India, she ran a community kitchen by the name of Janta Rasoi in Gurugram. Today's Tête session is presented by Shree Cement Limited. Now, I would request the audience to sit back, relax, and brew up enjoyment in today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome, Pooja. And I really look forward to meeting you in Dehradun when I am there next.
Absolutely.
It's going to be fun to spend some time with you there. So let's get started. Let's dive right in. Abhijit, it's interesting. I mean, you're so multifaceted. I was just thinking that with the Ukraine crisis that's going on right now, I know that you'd be one of the foremost experts on it right now in India. And I'm so tempted to talk to you about that. But instead, we're going to be talking about woke culture, which I think is also very close to your heart. I noticed, Ms. Khanna referred to you as her. So I think that must have pleased you. I don't know if she meant to do it or that was an error, but I think it pleased you.
No, she respected my gender fluidity in all of this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for thank you for not falling for gender binary bigotry, because I detest people who identify as man or woman. Unless people are trans, they're fundamentally the born bigots.
Yeah. So Abhijit, let's dive right into it. What is woke? I know the etymology of the term. It came from, African-American language, experience, all of that. And then it sort of got appropriated by millennials and then pretty much everyone else.
Okay, so just to clarify, during the introduction, I think that was an old bio of mine. I'm no longer at ORF. I work at a think tank called the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and I was at Stimson and Sandia quite some few years back. But what is woke? Well, look, it's very easy to put down woke as a set of honestly bizarre cultural phenomenon that we see. But basically what it is the Marxist theory of class struggle replaced with race and gender, where class struggle is forwarded, but through the prism of race and gender. So what happens is everything is racial oppression, systemic racial oppression, okay, systemic white privilege, etc., etc., etc. And gender binaries by themselves are deemed a oppressive construct which you have to constantly struggle against. And you have to find your little micro minority within a spectrum of 72, 73 different, I've lost count of how many genders there are right now. But that's basically what wokeism has come to. Interestingly, when you look at the genesis of wokery, it does actually have to do with class struggle. Because remember, till the information age the digital age that started in the 80s because of microchips and then became the information age in the 1990s, manufacturing was the main bulk of every developed economy. After that, it moved to the services because the manufacturing became so high end, it could have a massive, footprint in which the services industry could come in. So today, if you look at it, 70% of every developed country's economy is actually based on services, which is essentially based on the value addition of its manufacturing, technically speaking. Now, in all of this, it's really important to understand why this plays into the woke mindset is because overnight, it created a class of quasi-white collar people. They're not really white collar. They're kind of bank employee, tellers at banks or, BPO employees and things like that. They're not blue collar, but they're not exactly white collar either.
Yeah.
And therein lies the genesis of that class struggle that had been very carefully defined, where only between 2 to 7% of the population were the elite, and the rest essentially had to do manual labor or labor of some form out in the fields, suddenly got transformed to an industrial workforce and then to a services workforce, which was automatically a class upgrade, but not necessarily a major lifestyle upgrade. It was, but relative. See, when you were a factory floor worker, you might have earned this much, and as a quasi-white collar, you earned this much. The problem was when you were earning this much, your boss was earning this much. Now that you're earning this much, your boss is actually earning that much. So the differences exacerbate, and it's a new way of, forwarding class struggle through the prism of race and gender.
Right. And this, of course, links into, the expanding middle class the world over now, where that transition, that transition from, sort of on the edge of middle class or even now with the economic struggles, people falling into middle class as well.
Yeah. So the thing is, this is literally, it's a disease of the middle class, if you want to call it that, because that is the very market that it seeks to exploit. Originally, what would have happened was that, you didn't really have much of a middle class. They were called the petits bourgeois. And, they were generally viewed with contempt by the communists. The communists, every time they used to take over a country, they used to kill off the petty bourgeois. In China and Russia, they used to round them up and execute them. But today, they are the vanguard of the communist revolution. What Mao's Red Guards were, today it's the petty bourgeois who are sort of the vanguard of that revolution in that sense. The problem is in India, if you remember, that reforms that we had in 1991, Narasimha Rao's reforms, they changed India very profoundly. We went from being a largely rural population to, for all effects and purposes, actually an urban population. It's hidden, it's hidden under different categories, because in cities you will have villages that are classified as villages. I live in a place called Safdarjung Enclave. 90% of the land area of Safdarjung Enclave is actually a so-called village called Humayunpur. Or you go to Yusuf Sarai, which is in the middle of Delhi, South Delhi, it's considered a village. Hauzkhas, which is one of the most posh shopping areas of Delhi, is technically a village, right? Hauzkhas village. So we mask it up, but today about 60 to 70% of India is urban. And we've overnight created a middle class of sorts. Now, what's very curious is wokery seems to affect Anglophone countries more than it affects non-Anglophone countries. All right. So you find that the level of English, the higher the level of English knowledge, the greater the sort of tendency towards wokery. Why? Because most of academia has become English. Remember, the humanities have always been the preserve of the left in the sense. Much more so since the end of the Cold War. So the more the humanities became English and left, and French and Spanish and other languages sort of lost their sheen in the global homogenization that happened, it's actually acted as a defense mechanism for including India. We're blessed not to have most of our population speak any kind of passable English, which kind of prevented them from going all woke. But you see, Sweden and Norway, where English speaking is very high, would be much more woke than a country like France, where English speaking is frowned upon and almost non-existent. And isn't it amazing that this application of gender and race originates in France? It comes from these 62, what I call the rotten intellectuals, but they were considered the great intellectuals of their time through the 60s, who were, for all effects and purposes, they were child molesters. People like Derrida and Foucault, who made no qualms about it. They wrote about it quite openly. And they tried justifying all of this in terms of sexuality and gender variability and things like that. And
that's all Foucault wrote about, actually.
That's all Foucault, exactly. And the thing is, the French saw him for what he was. They saw him as a quack and they kicked him out.
No, but there was a certain, you remember Roman Polanski also, after he had that whole scandal, he moved to France because there was a, I don't know if it still exists, but certainly there was a certain pervasiveness when it came to, minors and underage and sexuality and all of those things without
absolutely. Look, it actually starts in 1920s Berlin, the Weimar Republic, where dressing in drag and being gay and having publicizing all your sexual fetishes was okay till Hitler came to power and gassed all of them off. And it was kind of the chic in culture in the 20s, which kind of was subcutaneous but came out again in the 60s. But people like, say, Roman Polanski, there was a lot with, say, Serge Gainsbourg in terms of drugs and things like that, but it was a permissive environment up until the point that you didn't infect the French public with your ideas. These were meant to be rotten ideas that got exported. Like, France will export all its third-rate cheese and third-rate foie gras and third-rate champagne to other countries. The best will always be retained for France or for airlines. Airlines are 90% of the world's caviar consumers. They're also apparently something like 60% of the world's champagne consumers. I read somewhere.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So, business class and first class, you judge them by the champagnes that they serve you, right? This is why, say, people would prefer, say, Qatar or Singapore Airlines over British Airways, which serves you, honestly, very trashy champagne. Like, you go on British Airways business class, you get like a $40, $50 Lance and Brut. You go in Qatar Airways, you're treated to like a $160 salon. and you go in first class and you're treated to a vintage Roderer at about $370 a bottle. So, it's airlines are actually very big movers of the champagne and caviar market. So, it essentially, it's a French champagne and caviar intellectual culture, which they accepted as long as you didn't infect your own people with it. You infect outside, it's fine. Don't come into it here.
No, I mean they had people like Marquis de Sade and I mean who who was sort of like very much presaged a lot of what we see happening right now in the world. That was the French for you. I like the French, actually, if you ask me.
I love the French. I think they're very cool people.
Europeans, yeah. They're nicer than the British. I mean, but that may be my own post-colonial
They're not as nice as the Italians, I think. But yeah,
they're
very nice.
Warmer, yeah. Probably warmer. Yeah, but coming back to Woke, and I've been getting like tons of comments where people are like, bring him to Ukraine. I want to say that Prabha Khaitan Foundation is actually hosting this interaction with Abhijit very kindly. So with their permission, when we finish another 10 minutes of this, we'll move to Ukraine, and Abhijit will spare us a little time with that because otherwise I'll get massively trolled. But isn't wokeness sort of becoming really, really oppressive? I mean, you have Bill Maher, who I think is a liberal to the bone, I feel, in a very genuine way. And he sort of, has taken down woke culture, taken down cancel culture most recently. How closely linked are the two? And isn't this like oversensitivity or in some ways, putting everyone through this rigorous, we used to call it political correctness, PC, right, back in the day. But PC is like sort of evolved into this almost dictatorial wokeness, wherein, you're cancelled for the smallest things if you don't fall into a certain speech pattern.
Absolutely. And see, this was a classic pattern used during the Middle Ages by the church and mosques. Generally by religious institutions, and later on by communists or any autocratic regime, really, to keep people in perpetual fear. So see, it plays into a lot of the same psychosis. So what used to happen in medieval Europe was, if you wanted to get rid of certain unsavory characters, who the feudal lord felt was unsavory, you brought an allegation of witchcraft or heresy against them. And there would be a whole lynch mob that would gather out. You'd be dragged out of your house. If you were lucky, you would be killed off. If you were not, you'd be tortured for days and then burnt alive. All right. If you were given a trial at all. This mutates then to what you call communist show trials, which even now you can go to YouTube and check out the videos of what happened in Soviet Russia and especially in China, where, the same, notice the class of people. It's not the lowest worker who's actually doing hard work. It's a whole load of quasi-unemployed, semi-white collar, slightly lower than petty bourgeois folks who would come out, the peasants, so to say, who would come out, who would be extremely upset with their lot in life. And they would need to take out bloody revenge on somebody else. You see this in throughout China as well, during the Cultural Revolution and things like that, that somebody will get accused of a thought crime. They all go out, they beat him up, re-educate him, send him off to re-education camp, or kill him, what have you, kind of thing. This is the latest manifestation of a social trend that we've seen for at least about 1,200 to 1,300 years. It wasn't probably so prevalent in the classical period, that's to say classical antiquity or even late antiquity. It's a very medieval phenomenon that reaches fruition in the communist revolutions. And this is the latest version of it. Of course, nobody's coming and killing you in your house and dragging you out and burning you alive, but they do destroy your career and things like that. As we saw, they've been trying to do with Joe Rogan. It hasn't worked.
Yeah.
But you never know when it's going to happen. Now, you know what's particularly amazing is you find a lot of tech companies. The call for this kind of thing, surprisingly, doesn't actually come from the humanities. A lot of it comes from the high-tech Silicon Valley companies. And there's a reason for it. What had happened over the years was management culture in tech companies had become extremely informal. And it had become very, the management structure had become very horizontal, flat and horizontal. So, there was a lot of collective decision making and things like that. On the other hand, when you can have a very nebulous set of rules, which you never know who they're going to be applied against and constantly keep everybody under terror, it's a fantastic way for management to gain back control and put a hierarchy in place. Right?
Yeah.
Which is why you see a lot of companies adopting it very enthusiastically and being evangelists for this kind of nonsense.
No, I mean, and I feel that there's so much cannibalization that happens within the far left ecosystem because of this cancel culture and this woke culture, because they have such exacting standards that they just end up canceling each other out. And I mean, the rest of us watch, frankly. But I think Deepa Mishra has a very interesting question. She says, how woke has, the culture evolved to take on a more political connotation? I mean, it's being used for politics. You see the outrage of the day for, I mean, people like us, Abhijit, who are, on TV quite a bit and commenting on social issues that take place. I would say about 55% of those, it's reduced. I have to admit, it's reduced. But back in the day, most of what you were commenting on was what somebody said, where they said it, how they said it, that they were refusing to apologize. And it's important to make noise, because we had instances where we saw some really sexist comments coming in from parliamentarians in the Rajya Sabha. So you have to call that out. I don't think that's being woke when you call that out. But somewhere there's the cycle of outrage that exists. And I want to talk to you about that, the political connotations of it.
Look, it's always been political. Because remember, if you do not contain outrage effectively and channel it purposefully, it can turn against you. So any expression of outrage has always been challenged by the powers that be. In the olden days, when there was only one king ruling, or one duke or one count ruling in a certain area, it would be channeled by him and directed towards certain enemies he had within his fiefdom. Today, in a bipartisan or in India multi-party structure, it is channeled by a certain ideology against the other. But I generally have always had an issue with outrage mobs, because look, when a person says something, it really reflects on their upbringing, their education, their circumstances, their context, and things like that. I think it's much more helpful, instead of outraging about what a person said, to see where that statement comes from. What is the mental place, the socioeconomic strata that statement comes from? And use it as an indicator to pinpoint problems and fix them.
Yeah. No, interesting. And I think that's one reason where I have personally stopped outraging on every random comment, as I
for example,
if
you remember, during the Nirbhaya rape, some Khap Panchayat put out that statement ki chowmin khane se rape hota hai.
No, I missed it. I was living abroad at that time. Yeah.
Okay, so some Khap Panchayat basically said that rapes happen because you eat chowmin. This spicy Chinese food doesn't suit our boys, and they eat chowmin. Now you have to go in and see why did they. It's fine going. NDTV running 15 shows. How could he say this? How could they all say this? It's ridiculous, etc., etc. What have you changed? They might have apologized, but in the end, that's fundamentally what they believe. See, they want to give this attitude: boys will be boys, and this is what boys do. They went back with it. They're not remorseful. They've not had a change of mind. They've had zero introspection. Instead of outraging, what I would have rather done is gone there and seen what's happening, because that's a very important early warning indicator of how gender relations are in that particular town and things. Mm-hmm. And I've actually done something because I suspect there would be a lot of gender and sexual violence in that particular town, which would get whitewashed by a Kap Panchayat like this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And let's move to Ukraine. We have about 15 minutes. With your permission, Ms. Khanna, if we can just dive into that a little bit, since war has been announced.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Abhijit, I didn't expect it to come to this. Maybe I'm the eternal optimist. I'm from the generation of P.V. Narasimha Rao's liberalization, where I think we turned out to be quite an optimistic generation. We saw a lot of firsts. But on a more serious note, I mean, I really didn't think that it would come to this, that Putin would actually attack. Did you expect it? On the chat, they're saying that you didn't think either that it would come to this.
I absolutely did not. All my friends in the Kremlin were telling me, look, we're not going to do this. I mean, I'm not talking about ordinary people. I'm talking people within the Russian government telling me this. Okay. And it also did not make sense, because I think all our calculations were that Putin can achieve a lot more not going in than by going in. You just keep the troops on the border for 2-3 years, you destroy Ukraine's economy, you incite internal discontent, and ultimately either Ukraine or NATO will cave. I am still to come across a convincing strategic explanation by a Russian or a Westerner as to how this benefits Russia. Because mark my words, the sanctions, when they're announced tomorrow, are going to be brutal. They are going to be nasty. I don't know what Putin was thinking when he did this. He'd achieved a lot of what he wanted to achieve. He had shown Biden to be inept and incompetent. My Russian friends are surprised. My Russian friends are just as surprised. I think the inkling that I got, and literally till last evening, I was convinced that there was no invasion that was going to happen. And then something suddenly changed. I got a call from my friend in Moscow saying, I think we're going in. And here's the funny thing. I'm telling her, nah, honey, you don't really know. I know better than you. I mean, imagine she works in the government. And I'm telling her, nah, you don't know. I know better than you. Your boss is actually very, very smart. You have a poor opinion of him. He's a super smart guy. He's not going to do something this foolish. And he goes in. Now, is this going to hurt the West? Because understand what's going to happen. Russia is one of the biggest phosphate and nitrate fertilizer suppliers. It's one of the biggest gas and oil producers. Oil prices are going to go through the roof.
They've already gone over $100 a barrel.
Yeah. Gas is probably, either Russia's probably going to weaponize gas and shut it off depending on what sanctions the EU imposes, which means you're going to see a lot of Europeans freeze in their houses. Because there's simply no other form of heating, and it's bitterly cold in Europe at the moment. So if not freezing, I mean it's going down to -2, which isn't really bitterly cold in a European sense. But it's not. They're not going to be living in the comfort that they used to. So the next 2-3 months are going to be extremely uncomfortable for a lot of Europeans. You're going to see the inflationary pressures because fertilizer prices going up, oil prices going up, gas prices going up. They all accumulate on food prices and transport prices and everything. You're going to see a particularly horrible cycle of inflation happening globally, actually.
I was reading that Putin essentially has a war chest of $6 billion. So he's not really that worried about the sanctions. That's not something that is going to really bother him. They're going to be harsh. And then the other thing is, the famous Russian oligarchs of the last, I guess, 2.5 decades post the collapse of the Soviet Union have their tentacles pretty deep in Western societies, to the extent of even funding political parties, and including, for example, the it is rumored, it is alleged, the conservatives in Britain who hold power right now. So where do you see big money coming in?
So remember, a lot of the big money is actually antagonistic towards Putin. The old oligarchs, Yeltsin's oligarchs. Putin has his own new set of oligarchs, mostly with some kind of Ukrainian or Jewish connection. Almost 90% of Putin's oligarchs are Jews.
The president of Ukraine.
Yeah, and of the remaining 10%, of the remaining 10 or so, 6 of them are actually of Ukrainian birth. There are very few Russians or Orthodox Christian Russians amongst the brigade of oligarchs that he has. But he's basically gamed them to have a sanction-proof economy. He's been working very hard on self-reliance in terms of machinery, technology, energy, of course, no issues. And remember, Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of every single commodity on earth. There is not a single mineral where Russia wouldn't be in the top 3, 4, 5 producers. Right. So I'm waiting to see what these sanctions are. I think it's the sanctions that really interest me, because now, we're seeing the end of it.
Yeah, the EU kind of said that this is going to have to do with technology and they kind of led on to things that are going to really impact Russia's future. But, I'm also interested about China, Abhijit. They've set out some terse statements wherein they've said that, territorial integrity, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? What's the game there?
Look, I think China and India are in the same boat. We can't afford to alienate Russia, India especially, right? Because for us, if we alienate Russia and China together is our nightmare come true. So we will never be able to do that. There is an understanding of that in DC, right? I think the threshold for accommodating that understanding might have reduced because of it. So it does put us in a bit of a spot, but it is something that adept diplomacy should be able to get you out of. The issue is, will the MEA Babus come off their high horse and actually do the spade work required to achieve that result? I doubt it, but maybe they'll surprise me once in a blue moon. But
Abhijit, just quickly, the Ukrainian ambassador today in New Delhi gave quite an impassioned appeal, wherein he said that, please, Narendra Modi is one of the most powerful leaders.
Look, I don't want to go over that, because that poor man, you could just tell he was extremely distressed. Okay, his country's under attack. This is the end of Ukrainian independence as we know it. Okay, Ukraine ceases to exist as of today. I don't expect the fighting to continue beyond maybe Friday at this pace. If we suddenly see some miraculous spurt in resistance, maybe it will continue for 2-3 weeks, but it's all effectively done and dusted. The major battles have been lost, and there's nothing left to do. I think all the Ukrainian ambassadors everywhere are in extreme distress at the moment. So, there's let's not dwell on that, because, it's kind of putting people in their desperation in a particularly weird spot.
It's actually very sad to have watched that.
But sorry, coming back to the question, India will condemn this, but it will not do it in harsh language. Okay, the same way that we avoided harsh language during the 2003 American invasion of Iraq. If you remember, we did condemn it, but we didn't condemn it in harsh language. We said, this is wrong. It should not have happened. We call on all parties to find peaceful solutions and respect territorial integrity. We will say the same thing today. It is the same thing we said in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, with an important proviso, which was not in the official statement, but it's something that Shiv Shankar Menon, the National Security Advisor, who's always known for stirring the pot by his oversmart statements on the side, said that, Russia has legitimate interests in Crimea. You're not going to hear a repeat of that statement anymore.
No, so what Putin has said, Abhijit, is that Russia's goals are not expansionist. This is not about territorial expansionism. This is about a denazification, is one word he used.
Yeah.
as well as Russia protecting its own security interests and a demilitarization of Ukraine. Now,
Yeah.
do you think if we're already getting reports of Ukrainian soldiers laying down their arms, on the other hand, the president is saying citizens who want to pick up arms, they're going to be available to you. So it's all a little bit of in a flux. Do you think Putin means what he's saying, that they're only there to do these two things and they're not there to kind of expand their territory or annex Ukraine, so to speak? Because on the other hand, he says that, look, culturally, we're the same people. We're not any different.
So look, I'm sure he believes what he says. So you have to look at it from the perspective that he's coming from, which is that, they simply cannot allow Ukraine to become a NATO member now or ever. Okay, Ukraine can never be allowed to pose a military threat to Russia. They were never going to tolerate it anyway. I remember, I've said this very openly at ORF. We've had several Russians come on the platform and say this: the day Ukraine joins NATO is the day we send our tanks in. Unequivocally. As early as 2012, 2013. Okay. So there was no this thing. What's surprising is it's been done before Ukraine joined NATO, or Ukraine even met the basic criteria for applying to NATO, or even the EU for that matter. Right. So we still don't understand what was this exact trigger, because all I'm hearing a lot of invective. Putin is a madman. Putin is this, Putin is that, about how this entire thing plays out. The problem is it doesn't actually translate into something that helps us explain why Putin made the decision. But demilitarization, yes, he was sincere about it. Denazification is something more complex, because that is a kind of an ethnocentric argument to make. Because essentially what he's seeing is this sort of marginalization of Ukraine's Russian minority on the one hand, and the sort of resurrection of, honestly, Nazi collaborators like Stepan Bandera and people like that, who used to run Nazi death squads. Mind you, the current Canadian Foreign Minister, Chrystia Freeland, was one of those people. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, her granddad actually was a Ukrainian who ran a viciously anti-Semitic magazine, which used to go around identifying Jews to be shot and killed and thrown into gas chambers, or inciting pogroms against them. All right, this existed. It is reality. And the former president, not Poroshenko, was it? I forget who the president then was, actually conferred the highest national honor on Stepan Bandera. That would be the equivalent of today's Germany conferring the Bharat Ratna on Hitler. I don't know what Germany's highest national honor is, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. No, this is so you are saying how long do you expect this to continue? Because it's kind of devastating at this time of COVID and this turmoil to see a war take place.
Look, I think there's several indicators that it's not going to go on very long, because what's happened is you've seen Ukrainian fighter jets defect to Romania and neighboring countries. They don't want to fight. What you're seeing is Ukrainian troops have been killed in large numbers. They're laying down their arms in large numbers, apparently. And it's actually a sign of desperation. It's illegal. You can't tell your population to take up arms because technically you're putting them in harm's way. So, it's really sad. Ukraine deserves better. But I think Ukraine basically got screwed over by its own leaders. And it got led up the garden path by the West. The West should have really...
Yeah, because now, Abhijit, they're not offering any military support. They're only offering sanctions. That's the only language they're speaking.
The only thing that they were willing to do was to use Ukraine to needle Russia. Okay. They went on giving false hope and false promise, which the Ukrainians fell for because, it was this need for wishful thinking. Because what the Ukrainians endured was such absolute and complete corruption and a rot of their institutions.
Yeah.
It was almost like Pakistan. Pakistan always wants to think, somebody is going to come save us. Either China is going to come save us or America is going to ultimately come save us. And, conspiracy theories. That's kind of how their society was running at the moment. It's actually really sad, but it's a pity that their society never saw what was happening around them.
But even the Americans, they're not coming out looking like smelling of roses, because you had the Afghanistan situation barely 6 months ago, where they pretty much bailed on the Afghans. Now, in this situation, there's a lot of talk coming from the White House, but there's nothing, no action as such. There's nothing concrete.
We're a year and 1 month into Joe Biden's presidency. 25% of his presidency, and there have already been 2 major debacles, Afghanistan and now Ukraine.
Yeah. And
this is the problem of having too much ideology, too much wishful thinking masquerading as scholarship, and too much quackery. But this is how it ends up.
Bottom line is, Trump in many ways was better for the world than Biden has been so far. And secondly, the other thing, what are the odds of World War III? It was trending all day on Twitter. And it's the thought that, other countries are then going to start picking fights and come on one side or the other side. Is that a possibility? And one more, Abhijit, one more question. One
second, one at a time, otherwise I'll keep forgetting. Look, I mean, who's going to get encouraged by this? Technically, just China to take back Taiwan and India. Does India have a defense treaty with anybody else? No. So if India goes down, only India goes down. There is no world war. If Taiwan guaranteed protection by anybody else? No. So if Taiwan goes down, only Taiwan goes down. The possibility of cyclic action right now isn't exactly very high.
Okay.
What we see is a dangerous threshold where Russia is reduced economically to such a level where it has no other option other than to strike out. And that's called the Yamamoto option. Because, that's what happened with Japan. America imposed crippling sanctions on Japan. And ultimately, Japan felt it had no other way other than to declare war on America, to sink the American fleet and capture the oil producing areas of Indonesia. And that's why they attacked Pearl Harbor. And, Yamamoto said, he told the emperor very clearly, I can guarantee you victory for 6 months. And after that, I cannot guarantee anything. I am hoping that the Americans have learned not to repeat that particular mistake that they made. But given their monumental stupidity, you can't really rule that out.
And the other thing, this is, you mentioned Taiwan, which was really going to be my next question. What are the odds that a certain threshold in international relations has been crossed? I mean, the United Nations is too busy talking about online trolling and online violence to actually pay any attention to what's happening on the ground, frankly. It's a colossal failure. Do you think now, tomorrow, if China wants to go at it and, annex Taiwan, which it's always tempted to do, then, you have Australia, you have Japan, you have all these countries. Is anything going to come of it? Or is this going to embolden expansionist regimes to try
I think China has a very clear route to reintegrating Taiwan right now. Because remember, Taiwan is not recognized by Australia, Japan, Korea, any of them, America. There is no formal defense commitment to them. And the question you have to ask yourself is America willing to risk nuclear war and San Francisco getting obliterated in lieu of Taipei? And I think the answer to that is a very clear no.
And really,
anyway, there is no formal treaty. So no.
Yeah. And really, the last question is about what our viewers are who our viewers are very uncharitably referring to as Katora Khan. I mean, this is YouTube, so we're not that politically correct, even though the initial subject was on book culture. What is he doing in Moscow? and then he lands at the airport, and there's some like minor politician there to receive him, and he says things like, "Oh, this is such an exciting time to be here." I'm like, Jesus, this is a war that's going to break out.
Look, it was the first time a Pakistani prime minister has been accorded this kind of an honor to, come to Moscow and meet. Primarily because it's kind of a sign to India saying, if you go too far towards America, understand we also have friends in the region. On the other hand, it's equally a sign to, tell him, you've lost control over Afghanistan. Don't pretend you control Afghanistan anymore. Because from everything we've seen of what the Haqqani network's been doing, you're not calling the shots there anymore. So instead of playing too smart by half, behave yourself and cooperate with us in containing any fallout that comes from Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, I'm going to let you get back to your festivities. I want to thank you, Abhijit, for taking time away from all the dancing you're going to be doing in a few short minutes, I assume. But would love to have you back on a more detailed discussion on, the Ukraine as things progress. And thanks to your YouTube stardom, this is the Tête with the largest number of live viewers we've had since we started. So thank you, Abhijit. I must acknowledge your superstardom on YouTube. It's real.
Yeah, I think I'm still trying to live down the shame of saying Putin's not going to invade.
Are you still trying to figure out why you're so famous and why people are obsessed with you on YouTube? That you just say, I don't even have to say, take your full name. I just have to say AIM, and they'll be like, oh, okay, we're there.
Yeah. So apparently, I was at the Z-Earth Lit Fest 2 days back. And apparently all my fans descended on their live chat and they were making ribald jokes about bald people and homosexuals and things like that. So the organizers were like, what's happening? We normally have a very civilized audience. There's a whole mob of extremely uncivilized people that have descended. But, I guess they're all very sunny personalities like me. That's, I guess, my Jhund that follows me wherever I go.
Oh yeah, it's like
no matter how many predictions I get wrong, incidentally, like the shame of living down, Putin's not going to invade.
No, that literally, they're true fans, because that literally was like 3 comments and then everyone just moved on. Like, yeah. He got it wrong.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. But thank you so very much again, and over to you.
Thank you. On behalf of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, I would like to thank Mr. Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Ms. Advaita Kala for today's Tête session. I would also like to show my gratitude to our presenter, Shri Cement Limited and Associate Kahali. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our audience, our patrons, without whom these sessions would not have been successful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.